You are listening to TMI for the week of June 18th, 2018. This week on the show, returning guest Dennis Riches. He lives, works, and writes in the Chiba Prefecture in Japan. We discuss his recent article, The Pitfalls of Disarmament Through Western Eyes. Lit by Imagination, www.litbyimagination.com. Dennis is always looking for ways events, policy, and culture interact to produce what we see going on around us. On the list of topics, nuclear weapons, Trump, Korea, and China as viewed from Japan.
What's going on in Japan?
The government just seems to be confused all the time by how to deal with the Americans these days. You know, they're always the loyal client state of the United States, but they can't figure out how to react to Trump.
And it's Abe still, or no?
Yeah, it's still Abe.
Yeah. And how would you characterize him if using sort of Western ideas like Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal?
Fairly conservative. He's a nationalist Republican. You could say part of the ruling elite, the ruling party that's governed Japan for most of the last 70 years since the occupation ended. Yeah.
I think I noticed in the news recently aircraft carriers were on the table.
Yeah, lots of military deals, and they're constantly talking up the China threat. You know, they've never resolved their historical disputes and come to a common understanding of what happened during World War II and the figures of the Nanking massacre and the comfort women issues. So they tend to look at China as a growing communist threat, and making aggressive moves in the South China Sea to control the seaways.
You can't have a arms race or a military buildup without fear.
Yeah.
I got the idea that aircraft carriers were not really a serious consideration. You were suggesting that Abe is all over the place when it comes to his perception of this relationship between Japan and the United States.
Yeah, they're just confused these days about how reliable America is going to be, and are they going to be sidelined in talks with North Korea, things like that.
But in a lot of ways, I'm assuming that Japan has, since World War II, been an important sort of military asset in perpetuating this idea of the United States, being the policeman of the world, or just everywhere.
Sure. Yeah.
The extension of U.S. power.
Oh yeah, it's called the unthinkable battleship. There's U.S. military bases all over the country, especially in Okinawa.
Uh-huh.
And I just finished actually hosting a guest speaker from Vancouver. Actually, she's Japanese, but she lives in Vancouver, and she's a specialist in Okinawa. Co-written a couple of good books about it, and that place has really been brutalized over the last 7 decades.
By the presence of the base there.
And
what is it? I mean, we think of bases as being very contained, beyond the fence line.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the way it is in Okinawa. There's interaction with the local population that always seems to be in the news. Yeah,
it's not a big place. And the bases take up, I think, about 40% of the territory on the island. And so, of course, they're going to push up against the local population. The Futenma Air Base is just totally surrounded by the town, residential areas. And the Americans they just live in constant fear that some big accident is going to happen and cause a big disastrous scandal in that jeopardizes the relationship and the security treaty. And So they've been trying for years to relocate that base, but it means building another one in the northeast part of the island in a very ecologically sensitive area, and nobody wants it there either. They want the bases out, back on American territory somewhere, if they have to be somewhere. But the Japanese government just wants these bases to stay there, and they use money, politics, they bribe, they cajole, they back away from promises, and the Okinawans are ethnically different from the mainland Japanese, so it's there's a lot of ethnic tension between the two places, and so the Okinawans pay most of the cost and the burden of hosting military bases. Mainland Japanese don't really appreciate the sacrifice.
Is this crazy to suggest that Japan saves any money by having the arrangement it has with the United States when it comes to military?
Not really. And they've been a strangely compliant client state, because the Americans have bases in Germany and Italy, and the Italians and Germans, they pay some of the cost, towards operating these bases and sharing the defense burden and so on. But the Japanese pay about twice as much as the Germans and Italians do. Go out of their way to please their American protector.
And that's not viewed as some kind of war reparations that just has been left in place and forgotten about. It's just a bad deal.
Yeah, it's a bad deal, but as long as they think China and Russia are the big threat in the region, they think this is necessary for deterrence and defense.
I read your article, The Pitfalls of Disarmament Through Western Eyes. Pretty fascinating. A little bit cynical view of the ICANN Nobel Peace Prize. And I guess I'm not making any friends with them if I say this. It is interesting, when I think back to the 80s, what we saw as the anti-nuclear weapon movement. And after reading your article, I'm starting to realize that, that it really wasn't very practical, that they weren't really offering any solutions to the problems that would be created if we just removed nuclear weapons from the equation. There's still all these tensions and fears and the lack of verification, and that if you remove them from the smaller actors, there's still the big actors. It wasn't really... It was more an emotional idea that, the world would be much better without nuclear weapons, but none of the mechanics of the rationalization of how that would play out.
Yeah, and how conventional military power would be, and economic power would be used, after the Soviet Union was gone. And so you can see the Chinese leaders and the Russian leaders talking about nuclear disarmament. And the first thing they'll say is, well, what happens next? America is still outspending us on military, and we'll be outmaneuvered, totally overpowered by conventional military forces.
The Americans have bases essentially all over the world, and without the nuclear deterrent, those bases would remain, and that sort of extension of American power. It's sort of understood that present political borders largely are maintained, that the Americans aren't out using their power to take over new territory. Is that naive?
Yeah, well, I think they've done it through a lot of regime change operations.
Right.
Like Ukraine, that's been proven that the Americans were in there, fomenting that dissent there that happened in 2014. a lot of the dissent was real, but they were in there pushing it as well. And there was that taped phone call with Noonan, I think it was, who the recordings came out that she was actually deciding who the next leader was going to be, and they were basically anointing who was going to lead that next government. And it's been a disaster ever since then, because the corruption just continued, and the government moved farther and farther to the extreme right. And there's all these neo-Nazi elements in the country, and so
there's a bit of an irony, because in exchange for disarmament, wasn't there this promise that the U.S. would protect them?
Well, actually, no, because the original promise when the Berlin Wall came down was they promised Gorbachev that NATO would not move east, not 1 inch to the east, and Clinton reversed that in the late 90s against some good advice not to, and it's continued ever since. Ukraine's not easy to put into the NATO bloc.
The way world events work, the present becomes recent news and then history, and it's a wave, and it moves forward. Sometimes I miss the narrative a little bit. I'm blaming too much information. Because as the present becomes, as I said, recent news and then history. So for example, in the late 80s, when the wall fell, ending the USSR, it was around then that there was that Bosnian War. We were essentially, NATO planes were bombing former Warsaw Pact area. To me, that was the height of my sort of Cold War fear. But it happens at the same time the wall is falling.
Yeah, or shortly after.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was another place where there's lots of suspicions of regime change operations moving in, because there were old ethnic rivalries going back to the genocide against the Serbians that was carried out. I think it was in the 30s, and so the German government got really active in assisting these Bosnian separatists and independence and nationalist leaders, right after the Berlin Wall fell. And they started to, it looked like Yugoslavia was going to fall apart and Bosnia was going to declare its independence. And that scared the hell out of the Serbians, because they had been the victims of a genocide in the past. And so that provoked a reaction. And within a couple of years, the Serbians were the demons. They were, and of course they committed atrocities in reaction to that. But all of this was stirred up in order to break up Yugoslavia's socialist system and bring them into the fold of Western Europe. So that's one narrative we don't hear too often in the Western press.
All of this tension, it's going to continue to happen. It's sort of, I think we have to start admitting that this is actually, as much as we can have an anti-nuclear movement and wish for, for all of us to be on the same page, the reality is, we are vicious apes. Is there an argument that, does anyone need nuclear weapons?
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
When other countries may or may not have them, and even if they promise to get rid of them, have they gotten rid of all of us? Should someone have nuclear weapons? Yeah.
So you can say they're asymmetric deterrents, and some people have said too they're actually really cheap, compared to trying to build up your military with conventional weapons and have 2,000 tanks. It's much cheaper to build one atomic weapon.
These aren't conventional things for people who are against nuclear weapons to be asking or talking about. But that's kind of the problem, is that a lot of the thinking in between the great ideas hasn't been done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting your article talked about, and you have to talk about, the history of the two main actors. Let's say it's Russia, USSR and America. Mm-hmm. And you have to look at the events in history that led to the groundwork for this idea that mm-hmm. the two sides were poised against one another. A lot of it was fear-mongering, creating an enemy, blurring a lot of the facts on both sides. There's some interesting comparisons that you make in your article. You talk about socialism, capitalism, and fascism, and you suggest that the deal that was made with the American public, really after the Depression, included elements of socialism. So it was really a battle between socialism and fascism.
Yeah, that's the. Yeah, if you want to know why fascism appeared in Europe, it's because of the Russian Revolution a few years before, and the fear of communism spreading is really what led to fascism in Germany.
Is there a quick, easy definition for fascism?
Yeah.
How do we know?
Well, I thought of reading something to you. If I could read out a quote from a source I was reading a few weeks ago. This is a guy, his name is Mar Gorshin, M-A-W-R-G-O-R-S-H-I-N. He has a blog, and he wrote about this. He found a really good metaphor. And he used the Ouroboros, the snake that's eating its tail.
Uh-huh.
And he said, imagine the Ouroboros as the political spectrum, the head of fascism and the tail as communism. Let's superimpose the Ouroboros with the biting head to the right of the bitten tail to the left, at both extremes at the top. And on top, four-way political compass, not only with the self-explanatory left and right, but with the top representing authoritarianism and the bottom indicating libertarianism. Thus, the top left box would be for the Marxist-Leninists, the bottom left, the anarchists, the bottom right, the free market fetishists. Okay. And the top right, everything from Trump lovers to the idolizers of the likes of Pinochet, Franco, Mussolini, Hitler, fascism. Okay. The neoliberal Clintons, Obamas, and Bushes would be near the bottom middle right. Okay, so around this circle and at the bottom, you've got sort of what we had, mid-20th century, and the balanced system where you got some social benefits out of the economy and some protections for the workers, but it moves in one direction. There's no lateral movement around this snake. So if you don't want to keep moving to the right, you've got to push back to the left. So I thought that was a really good metaphor.
It's amazing.
So, political science in a nutshell.
Wow. And it always moves only in one direction. Yeah.
Well, it can't move laterally. You can push it back to the left with some kind of reform or revolution. But look at the election results in Ontario last night.
Okay.
Yeah, you see which direction we're moving.
Okay.
Without much resistance.
Okay, so here's what I want to ask you. It sounded for a minute like populism is fascism?
Yeah, I think that's what's implied there by the quote I just read out. Yeah.
That's not good news.
So if you get the Clintons and Obamas, if they're going to abandon the working class and not give them anything, they're just paving the way to Trump and maybe something worse after that. Yeah. Because the working class, just refused to come out and vote for Obama again.
I have a few concerns. One, the bubble that I was in when I was surprised that Trump won. There's no evidence that bubble has gone away, so my expectations for the midterms or the next election are probably not going to be accurate expectations.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's evidenced by last night's election in Ontario of Rob Ford's brother, Doug Ford. So, I mean, just to give you an idea of the connection between Doug Ford and Donald Trump, like Doug Ford was going to slash funding for the CBC, which is federally funded, or fire, all kinds of executives at Hydro One, but they kind of sold Hydro One. Things like wiping out the green belt, buck a beer.
They really said that, eh?
Oh yeah, he's promising buck a beer. This is one of the
bread and circuses.
Oh yeah. So this is not good news. I'm convinced that maybe you can straighten me out on this. Could this be the eventual failure of democracy? That its flaws, like calling it a democracy, yet you have two parties that vote in blocks.
Yeah.
Eventually, some would have argued that maybe it'll run for a while, it'll complete some kind of circle and fail. I believe now the public is voting as if they were picking a star on American Idol now.
Yeah.
We are unqualified to vote.
Yeah.
Am I going too far?
I would recommend a guy named Peter Joseph. Have you read his blog or seen his videos? He's got this thing going called the Zeitgeist Movement.
Okay.
And his book is The New Human Rights Movement. And he did a video a couple weeks ago where he looked at Bernie Sanders doing this big town hall meeting, and he criticized the way the discussion was going, and was sympathetic toward their views. But he said nobody here is talking about the structural problems in our system.
Mm-hmm.
And his main point going through this analysis was that, they talk about getting money out of politics, but you can't do that in our system.
Mm.
In our system, it's exactly what you expect. The correct thing is that the wealthy, oligarchs should control government because that's the way the system's set up. So he writes a lot about moving beyond this and talking about the need for really systemic change.
They'd be pretty simple ideas like a per vote subsidy, fully government funded election campaigns, caps on contributions.
Yeah.
I say no more billionaires run for, but who knows if that'll happen.
Yeah.
Getting back to your article, what about moving forward? Is there a way forward in the anti-nuclear movement? It must be trade deals. Good question. Trade deals are the only thing that seem to make sense. If you create an interdependency, then the two sides are forced to stay sort of on the same page and not get too polarized, no?
What do you mean exactly by a trade deal?
If you're not going to take away the weapons, then it seems to me that making them useless might be the strategy. And so if there's increased trade between two potential enemies, even North Korea, if they're included in the global economy, this seems to be the real peacemaker, trade agreements.
Take away the sanctions.
Right.
Negotiate an end to that. And the sanctions are unilateral and illegal anyway. Nobody has a right to slap sanctions on another country like that. And forcing other countries not to trade with another country. I mean, if the U.S. doesn't want to trade with them, that's fine. But I don't see how they should have that ability to pressure all other countries to close off trade.
One really does wonder what would happen if there were some parts factories that were opened in North Korea that supplied some South Korean, that they were included.
That was happening a while ago. There was a place on the border where South Korean businesses were hiring and employing North Koreans to work in small factories. A little bit of that was starting to happen, but I think it got closed down when the tensions came back up.
Do you think that these meetings between Trump and Kim Jong will lead to anything?
Yeah, it could go either way,
Yeah.
couldn't they? Could be a disaster,
Yeah.
but they could make a deal. Who knows?
You mentioned that focusing on this collusion issue with Russia and the United States isn't helping things.
Yeah.
In terms of maintaining this idea that the Cold War is still on or back on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's been a little bit delusional, and I've seen some people, intelligent people who are like academics at universities and legal scholars. They're putting out tweets saying that Trump is getting direct orders from Putin.
Right.
And I just find that delusional, that anybody could think that's how the world works, and that Trump and Putin are that similar. There's a historian, a Russian specialist, Stephen Cohen, who's been pretty much on a weekly basis talking about this. And he speaks Russian. He was over there studying before the Soviet Union collapsed and since then. And he's taught a lot of the people. I think he was teaching at Harvard or Yale. But a lot of his students have gone in to the CIA and the FBI and government agencies. And he believes that the Russian narrative, the Russian collusion story, is just a big civil war going on within the deep states. The CIA and the FBI, National Security Agency, they're all divided right down the middle. There's cliques within them. And half of them were annoyed with Hillary's and the Clinton Foundation's corruption, and the other half was appalled by the Trump's associations with Russian oligarchs and bankers, and so it could be a lot of this is just the mass media just being fed narratives from government institutions.
Has anything, if that's the case, has anything like that ever happened? Because that polarization, that sort of almost politicization of these institutions we always thought were above all of that, would that have happened before? Is that unprecedented? Why now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think it's ever happened like this. It's pretty crazy now. It's just like, one half of the government is just constantly litigating against the other half now. I remember some people saying that was what was behind Watergate, too. A lot of people were, angry at Nixon for détente and the trip to China. And so that's one theory of why he got so many enemies within his own party. His presidency couldn't survive scandal.
That's interesting. So in that model, where we all presumably worry about polarization and not being able to unite and not being able to be bipartisan, the extension of that, the extreme, would be where that polarization infects the institutions, such as the CIA, FBI, NSA. Well, that's kind of a mind-boggling...
Yeah. Or the polarization is being created and driven from those institutions. Just as a distraction.
What do you think? Do you believe that?
Yeah, I think I've been reading about the CIA plots and reading Douglas Valentine's books on exposing the CIA long before this ever happened. Back in the 70s and 80s, he published books on it. And he had really good inside information on it. And going back to the Kennedy assassinations.
Mm-hmm. This new president, he's not new anymore, he is always making these erratic policy shifts. He is obsessed with reversing most of Obama's policies. How can foreign governments possibly develop any foreign policy with the United States in this culture of just total random chaos?
Yeah, that's what's driving Abe crazy here in Japan. And which is interesting because he's actually been a little more conciliatory towards Putin now. They have a dispute over the northern islands here, and it looks like that might finally get resolved, and they're going to have some joint economic zones for cooperation up there.
All right. When Trump got all crazy during this North and South Korea issue, it looked for a moment like Trump was excused from the table, and the North and South went off and got business done without him.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way that Trump, planned for that positive outcome. The crazier I act, the more. But
but later he can take credit for it.
Right.
So.
Well, or it's like Clouseau in the Pink Panther, where he's sort of successful just by... Yeah. I want to know why nobody compares it to Peter Sellers' being there.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Why don't I hear more about it? He just watches TV, and I mean, we should be talking.
Well, Peter, but that character was likable.
Right.
That's the difference.
Well, maybe he's likable to Trump, his base.
There's some parallels with Reagan too.
Okay.
Because when Reagan, started getting serious, he had this big conversion around 1983 and started talking about the nuclear disarmament.
Right.
Eliminating the whole arsenal. And that really drove his cabinet crazy. His advisors and White House staff. And they were much to the right of him, and they really tried to derail a lot of the talks, with Gorbachev, those summits that happened. But he was a much more popular president, so they couldn't go against him.
Well, in this short-term, fast turnover politics of Western governments, even if we sign treaties and anti-weapons agreements, we can just turn them over in 5 years. Yeah,
that's the advantage of having one leader who's in power for 20 years. You get some consistency.
Right. Are peace prizes all they're cracked up to be?
Oh, yeah, you saw that list in the article, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mentioned the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. In the anti-nuclear
always
movement,
on the right side of issues.
Yeah, the anti-nuclear people despise them for covering up the health data and forcing the World Health Organization to take their line on the effects of nuclear disasters. But they won the Nobel Peace Prize at one point. Before Fukushima happened.
Yeah. A lot of shady characters have gotten it. And in your article you point out really often not necessarily for doing anything specific other than raising public attention or getting good press. Which I guess is of some value too. Yeah.
So that's great that they got the award, but I just don't think it should be overvalued. Or there's much more work to do.
Right. Which I still think the only thing that I've been able to think of that, at one point, at the heat of the Cold War, we were making a big deal about sports. Inclusion in sporting activities between military rivals was good for world peace.
Mm-hmm.
I never really got that 100%, but I think trade has got to be the only thing that I've thought of that actually renders nuclear weapons ineffective.
Yeah.
Too expensive, not worth the risk, and it would send a bad message to our trading partner. That sounds like a model for peace. It's a bit cynical because it ties it with money.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it makes more sense than playing soccer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's an old concept. Yeah, create trading partners.
Find us on Twitter at @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. TWXNET.com. You can find our episodes on Facebook and even on YouTube. Find us on Android and Apple Podcast apps, iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry, Player FM, Google Play Music, TuneIn, Listen Notes, Castbox, and even Laughable. Almost anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
In terms of perpetuating fear between both sides, Putin a few months ago released a video of, I guess, Russia bombing Florida.
Oh yeah, that is his big announcement. Yeah, the equivalent of the State of the Nation speech, and yeah, they had a few videos illustrating the new arsenal capabilities.
And meanwhile, it was Obama, I think, ordered the refitting or replacement of nuclear weapons, and I think Trump is letting that go ahead. I mean, again, we can never figure out. He's pro-Russia, he's anti-Russia. They're a threat. They're best friends.
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, a lot of it's the money flowing around the world. These oligarchs, you know, we wanted Russia to be capitalist, and we created these oligarch monsters. You know.
Interesting. This is the sort of battle since the sort of creation of North America's, Canada and the United States. It was about commercial oligarchy right from day one.
Yeah.
And it always has been.
Yeah, the Constitution and the democratic system, the Electoral College, all that, was set up to protect the property owners.
What do you think of my term, the Bronze Dawn? Because I like third place, third rate. It's kind of golden, orange. And dawn is kind of a mafia thing. So,
Yeah.
Are we going to survive this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
Is Donald?
I didn't think we'd survive the 80s.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Some of the things Reagan said in the first 2 years of his presidency.
Yeah.
Were just so insane. Being caught on mic saying the bombing begins in 5 minutes,
and yet we re-elect them.
Yeah.
What else are you thinking about writing about in the future?
I don't know. Maybe more about Okinawa. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
The bases here.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting example of democracy down there. So out at the local level, I mean, the opposition there by the local people against the bases has been really strong. I mean, there's probably no example in Canada or within Japan, mainland Japan. But the Okinawan people were colonized and annexed in the late 19th century, and the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, imposed the biggest suffering on them. The Japanese mainland was never, it was bombed, but it wasn't invaded like that. So this minority population suffered that attack, and then they were an American colony between 1945 and 1972. And the military leader of Okinawa was basically like a colonial governor as well. That's the way they were governed, and then they got the reversion back to Japan, but they were never able to decrease the presence of the bases and the impact of the bases.
It sounds like an experiment in American colonialization.
Yeah, for sure. But it's done through the client state system and status of forces agreements. So on.
Is there much munitions testing and war games and actual military activity that these people have to put up with?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that. And it was especially intense during the Vietnam War because it was like the launching pad. A lot of the newly recruited soldiers, newly trained soldiers would come to Okinawa, train a bit more, and get ready for missions. And so dioxin was stored on the island, and there was a lot of pollution.
Well, that's what I was thinking about when you said they were talking about relocating the base. I know that there's sort of a history of cleanup after military bases. The Americans seem to leave a mess. And what about the helicopters? We're always hearing about helicopters and noise from the base.
The noise pollution is terrible. I used to live near a base just out in western Tokyo. There's another base there. And the training sessions that go on are pretty intense, And we were living like 20 kilometers away, but in the middle of dinner, you've got to stop talking until the flights go over, and the noise is so bad. There's constant irritations.
I'm going to throw a thorn into all of this, into a wrench into the works. If Japan was in control of its own military, it would be similar.
Yes, the people in Okinawa know that. They talk about that too. But if they did have to normalize that way, well, then they would have to get along and do proper diplomacy with China.
Interesting.
And resolve some of those historical issues.
Yeah.
But as long as they can just hide under the American umbrella, they don't have to contend with that. And that's why it's gone unresolved, I think, all these years.
What is the current view of the Japanese population towards nuclear power?
It seems to be about 50-50, I think.
And is that
a pretty even split?
Changing as time goes on?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I haven't seen any objective surveys of it. Public opinion.
Interesting. It seems someone could do a poll on that specific question. And we read a lot about, nuclear being sort of replaced by wind and solar and offshore wind and tidal. And wherever it's tried in Japan, it's sort of touted it and made it sound like Japan switching to renewables. Is that a fallacy? Is that really happening?
I see a lot of solar going up around where I live here. My town is it's a small town, and I just ride outside on my bicycle 5 minutes. I'm out in the country, and a lot of farmland has been taken over with huge solar farms.
Okay.
And I don't know how they're storing the energy, though. I don't hear much about it.
Yeah.
But they must have some way of leveling the peaks that come from this.
Or they're throttling back other forms of generation.
Yeah. But going back to something you said there, though, about the public opinion, it actually reminded me of something somebody said at this public lecture I gave the other day, or I hosted the other day. Somebody in the audience was talking about public opinion in the localities where the power plants are. And he mentioned this the big fuel reprocessing facility up in northern Japan. And he said if you go there and you do a survey, people are for it. Okay? But the actual fact is this reprocessing facility has not been able to work as promised because it was supposed to take the reprocessed fuel and use it in these new reactors that were never built. And now the program slowed down, and nuclear power is making up less of a share. So it's obvious that the fuel produced by this plant, is going to be stuck there.
Yeah.
It's not going to be moved out the way it was promised to. But still, the local people are in favor of it. So if you trust the local survey and popular opinion, you say, "Oh, people love nuclear power. We got to keep it." But he made the point. He said, this is not public opinion; it's public deception. These people have been played and deceived.
How many of those people are employed or know somebody or are related to somebody who's employed?
Yeah, it's all for their economic benefits. They used to do other things before the nuclear facility was there, but now they've got the jobs.
It's a bridge to nowhere, no?
Yeah. And so in that sense, public opinion doesn't mean an awful lot.
Yeah. In Ontario here, so, I mean, there was a lot of hope with this NDP. The leader of the NDP was out in Pickering saying, we're going to close this Pickering plant down. And, of course, I think the next day Doug Ford was all out there saying, all of you people, if the NDP's elected, she's going to take away your jobs, you know.
Yeah.
So now that Doug Ford's in, I guess all those jobs are secure.
Yeah. But if Ford wants to, you know, cut all these expenses and make electricity cheaper,
right,
isn't he going to have to take some cuts to the nuclear facilities?
No, I expect he's going to up our provincial income tax.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I believe he will cut. I mean, that's what they all do. They all say they're going to cut the costs, but all they do is lower the price and then just add it onto your tax bill.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sure the buck of beer, one way or another, we're still paying full price for the beer.
Yeah.
And 10 cents off the gas. He's going to drop the price of gas by 10 cents, but I'm sure that's not going to be added to some fee or tax rate. Yeah, I don't know. But, you know, I mean, if we're stupid enough to elect these doofuses, we're stupid enough to not ask any tough questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what was the rural and urban split on the vote?
I haven't seen those statistics, but I don't think it's really following urban and rural lines. I think there's a lot of PCs were elected right in Toronto and in urban areas. So
yeah,
it is, you know, after 15 years of win, and I actually get it, you know, as much as I hate the swing back and forth between the two extremes. 15 years is a long time. People wanted change. I would have picked the NDP myself, but I've gotten used to not getting what I want, getting my own way. I was going to have a little temper tantrum this morning. And I realized I'm just not getting my own way.
Yeah.
I'm probably not ever going to get my own way. But
yeah. When was the last conservative sweep to power? Was that in the early 90s?
Well, under Davis, who built all these nuclear power plants, he was in power for like 40 years.
Yeah.
And then there was Peterson, and then Bob Rae, the NDP.
Yeah.
And then we had some conservative.
Yeah, who was that?
Miller. And then Ernie Eves. I think he took over from a retired premier of the Conservative Party. And then we got our Dalton McGuinty and our Liberals. I think that's pretty accurate. But 15 years ago, we had a Conservative government.
Yeah. I think Doug Ford's father was a minister, wasn't he, in that Conservative government? Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
I didn't know that, if that's true, yeah. I'm just, what I can't get over is of all the families in Ontario, why do we have to pick this particular one?
Yeah. Yeah, the buck of beer thing surprises me because, you know, Rob Ford was, you know, he died from alcoholism and other addictions. And why are they making beer cheaper?
Right. I don't know. Maybe the Fords are going to get into the beer business. I've been saying for a long time, if you want to get into a fist fight in a grocery store, just say something nice about Kathleen Wynne. You'd be surprised who comes running at you swinging. But, I mean, so many of the things are liberal ideas that she's done, a little bit socialist ideas. It just seemed to be the direction to go in if you're moving towards the future. So things like upping the minimum wage.
Yeah.
I mean, just simple things that immediately will be canceled and rolled back by Doug Ford. So Doug Ford's going to do what Trump did, to spend probably the first year just undoing all of the liberal advancements that have been made, rather than pursue an agenda, which obviously I can't imagine he would have any. But who knows?
Yeah. Well, that goes back to the structural argument that says, you can try to implement these progressive reforms, but in our system, they're always going to be rolled back.
Right.
Corporate power will eventually take over again.
A great nuclear example of that is that because of Bill Davis's pursuit of nuclear power as an experiment in Ontario, building 20 reactors, creating the largest bankruptcy in the history of money anywhere on our planet ever, with the bankruptcy of Ontario Hydro. When they split it into OPG and Hydro One, the promise was made that they could not sell either parts of those entities until the debt was paid off. And of course, Wynn went and sold parts of Hydro One. So you got these rules and ideas written into legislation, but all it just takes is a signature, and it's meaningless.
Yeah.
So like the Greenbelt. Like the Greenbelt's supposed to last us, 1,000 years and create this green buffer. But 5 years later, some idiot comes in with a bucket of beer, and that's it. There'll be 80-story condos only on the Greenbelt. And who do you think will buy up the land, but not conservative real estate investors and developers? And on it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what you realize when you get old. You start noticing, we fought these battles back in the 70s, and now we have to fight them again. And it's just like constant. You never get a secured victory.
And what's next in Japanese politics? Is Abe going to be ushered out by a liberal in Japan and fix it?
No, there's not really much opposition.
No.
Maybe we'll get a new prime minister through some internal, cliques within his party, just saying it's time for him to go. And we're getting a new emperor next year. For the first time ever, the emperor is resigning while still alive. So maybe they'll want a new prime minister at the same time.
And do they have any effect on policy, emperors?
No, not anymore. Their powers were taken out of the new constitution.
Wouldn't they, though, have some influence, at least in the public's sphere?
No, they refrain from commenting on these things, and for any politician to ask for an opinion or a comment, or it's just really taboo. To it. There was an independent anti-nuclear activist who he hand-delivered a letter to the emperor at some sort of informal gathering. And it was a plea to protect the residents in Fukushima. And he just got scorched for it. Half the people disagreed with his cause, and then the other half disagreed with his breach of protocol.
How do we find some more of your interesting articles?
litbyimagination.com. And so if anybody wants to look there, they can. And I wanted to put a plug in too for the Jimmy Dore show. Do you ever watch that?
No.
No. He's a nightclub comedian who started up doing a political YouTube video podcast about 2 or 3 years ago, and I've been watching him a lot. And if you want some signs of hope in American politics, he's bringing on a lot of what he calls progressive candidates who are challenging the Democratic Party establishment.
Okay.
And they're advocating single-payer health care, subsidized university education, debt relief for students, real things like that, which the core of the Democratic Party doesn't want to get on with. And
Jimmy Dore.
D-O-R-E.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And is that on YouTube?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll see. So good stuff there. It's funny and sharp political commentary. And he's just hitting really hard at both parties, at Trump and at the Democrats.
Yeah.
Oh, the book is on the way, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I mailed it a few days ago. So.
And what is the deal on that? That's something that's going to be published?
It's published. There's about 800 copies in existence now.
Yeah.
But it was non-commercial. It was published with grant money.
Hmm.
So it's not going to be for sale in stores. People have to order it through the research group here at the university.
Would you like to name
copies.
that research group and when that might come out? And
yeah, it's available now. It's called the Glocal Studies, just one word. That's Glocal with Glocal. Glocal Studies, all one word, at Seijo, SEIJO .ac.jp.
Wow. Excellent.
So yeah, we're just going to send it out to libraries and researchers, NGOs, and so on.
And it is talking about...
Yeah, stuff that was on my Nuclear Free blog.
Okay.
Try to just take the best of it over the past 6 years, and yeah, it looks totally different as a book.
So it's a collection of essays, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. I look forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, bye.
That was Dennis Riches. Check our show notes for links to his works. Or jot this down. Lit by Imagination. www.litbyimagination.com. We reached Dennis Riches by phone from Japan.
And for your information,
DTY...
Ah, the acronym. Here it comes. Do that which you say.
Hang on. DTWYSYGTD WYSYGTDI.
WTF.
Do that what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. DTWYSYGTD.
OD. Or don't.
DTWYSYGTD WYSYGTDI.
You can always count on the possibility of me doing that which I say I will do.
So what about DTWYSYGTD WYSYGTDI?
Or sometimes no.
Is that a values thing or a millennial thing?
Go
An
fuck
old
yourself.
person
No,
thing?
no, we're not doing this. There's no way. Today on the show, another person here to talk about accountability and miniature Batman figurines and the nuclear movement.
You know, it says in the iTunes agreement,
Oh boy.
it actually says something like, cannot be used for the creation or dissemination or distribution of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons in the iTunes agreement.
Diabolical. That is diabolical. All right. Find us on Twitter @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Find us on Android and Apple Podcast apps. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
I'm Dave Archer in Toronto.
And I'm Dennis Riches in Chiba, Japan.